Do you believe there are heroes living among us all their lives, unnoticed? An old man with silver hair, a faded jacket slung over his shoulders, quietly sipping his morning coffee. Who would suspect he once belonged to a top-secret unit, his very name scrubbed from every record? And then, the moment he rolls up his sleeve to stoke the fire, the whole town falls silent, and a Marine Corps general stands there, choked with emotion, coming to attention in salute. What secret lies beneath that faded tattoo on his arm? Stay tuned until the very end. Henry arrived every morning at exactly 7:10. It was as if an invisible clock inside him never missed a beat. He always chose the same spot, an old wooden chair by the window, where the soft light through the frosted glass illuminated the deep lines etched into his weathered face. No one ever asked why. No one dared disturb that moment of quiet. For when Henry settled in, ordered his black coffee with no sugar and a slightly charred toast, the entire diner seemed to soften. He neither spoke nor glanced around. He simply stared out the window, his eyes distant, as though he were conversing with something only he could hear. 3 tables away, almost every weekend, Jack Thompson swaggered in, his posture recalling days behind a gleaming nameplate. His faded uniform was crisply pressed. His medals gleamed as though fresh from some parade. Jack spoke loudly, recounting tales everyone there had heard a dozen times. The convoys he'd organized, the praise from generals, the luncheon with a Marine Corps general at San Diego Harbor, told with eyes sparkling. There was something in his voice, a mixture of pride and an unquenchable yearning to be recognized, as if no accolade was ever quite enough. While Jack spoke, Henry remained unmoved. No smile, no frown, not even a glance. His silence wasn't disdain, but a formidable, solitary fortress, unyielding and closed. No one knew what he felt as Jack laughed loudly, rattled off another commendation, or watched for any reaction from the old man in the corner. Yet a few regulars, those who'd been there long enough to read meaning in stillness, began to notice. Mary, the waitress of 30 years, each morning quietly set a black coffee and old newspaper at Henry's table. Nobody told her to. She simply felt he deserved it. Susan, a retired nurse who'd witnessed countless young soldiers' faces before they entered operating rooms, also stayed silent. But one day, as Henry rose and rolled up his sleeve higher than usual to dust the glass by his table, Susan glimpsed something no one else had seen, a faded tattoo along his forearm. Partially obscured by wrinkles, it nevertheless bore a shape she recognized from nowhere she'd ever served, a pair of wings, a slender blade crosswise, and an inscription in Latin, or something far older, lost to time's shadow. Susan said nothing. She posed no questions, told no one. But from that moment on, she saw Henry differently. There was something in him, a past he guarded as fiercely as his own soul, that demanded her respect. Not because he sought it, but simply because he never asked for it. Jack continued his tales, adding more embellishments each week. The laughter still rippled through the diner. A few heads still turned. But Henry did not budge. He arrived, sat in silence, and stared out the window as if someone were waiting there for him. And though nobody asked, it seemed everyone began to sense this. The difference lay not in words spoken, but in those left unspoken. Henry never told his story, yet his silence spoke more powerfully than any speech. A single glance, that faded ink, the simple gesture of wiping the glass, all served as a silent reminder that some people weather life's storms without leaving ripples behind. And it is their depth that truly resonates. Susan wasn't one to get swept up in stories without endings. 30 years as a nurse had shown her more unnamed suffering, more sudden deaths, and more faces frozen in unspoken regret than she cared to remember. Yet there was something about Henry she couldn't look away from, not because he was ostentatiously mysterious, but because of the silence within him, so deep it felt bottomless, echoless, uninviting, yet haunting. After the day she accidentally glimpsed that faded tattoo under his sleeve, ink so worn it seemed to have faded into memory, Susan began sleepless nights. She scoured the web for every symbol, every insignia. She sifted through dusty military archives, veteran forums, even obscure news clippings of uncertain origin. Each night was a journey into a past she could hardly believe, until one name surfaced, CP-11 Recon, listed among unofficial units that existed only as shadows, deployed in Southeast Asia in 1980. And the emblem, a slender dagger crossed with tactical wings, matched perfectly the shape she'd seen peeking from Henry's sleeve, a silent testament that he was no ordinary man. The more Susan learned, the heavier her heart grew, not from fear, but from empathy. This quiet man, who every morning sat alone in the diner, drinking his sugarless coffee and never uttering a word, had once been part of something many believed never even existed. And he carried that truth with him, not on medals, not in parades, but in a simple, ordinary presence that invited no notice. From that day on, she no longer saw Henry as just some lonely old man. She began to watch him more closely, never intruding, never approaching, just observing from a distance. Every time he left the diner, he didn't head straight home. He stopped at Memorial Park, where a modest memorial honors fallen soldiers. No official mandate, no nameplates. Yet every morning he arrived, bearing a small, worn bag. He would gently wipe each glass frame, straighten every photograph, remove dried flowers, and flatten misaligned notes blown by the wind. Susan had always assumed memorials were the province of committees and ceremonies, formal speeches and solemn music. But watching Henry carefully clean the face of a young soldier in a photograph, perhaps a comrade he once fought beside, she realized that some acts of remembrance need no official sanction. They live in repetition, in hands that tremble yet move with care, in each quiet bead of sweat on the glass that nobody sees. Henry never made a show of his loss, yet every movement spoke volumes. No hurry, no ritual flourish, just a routine as though if he stopped, the memories would slip away. And to him, that was unforgivable. Susan began to see him as a sentinel, not guarding the living, but watching over those who had fallen. Henry would not let dust settle on their names. He would not allow time to blur the gaze of the lost. Perhaps, in each photograph, he saw faces that no one else remembered, except him. Susan told no one of her discovery. She kept it private, a tribute to the past that Henry never chose to share. She simply sat afar, watching him continue his silent vigil, day after day. Each time he straightened a frame, refolded a dampened letter, or polished away the mist from the glass, she felt a part of herself heal, without reason, without anyone else knowing. For some people live their entire lives without making a sound, yet in that very silence lies the deepest echo for those brave enough to listen. That Memorial Day, the Memorial Park looked much as it had in years past. The ceremonial tables were lined up neatly, folding chairs arranged in rows as if awaiting a solemn rite. People carried small candles, a few printed poems penned by local students, and the high school band's music drifted through the air with old, ritualistic melodies. Everything felt respectful, yet formulaic. Jack Thompson stood in the front row, his military jacket freshly pressed, name and rank gleaming on his chest. He brimmed with expectation. Surely this year he would be invited to speak. For weeks he'd mentioned it to anyone who'd listen, recounting his logistics missions, the commendations he still kept, and with bright eyes, the luncheon he once shared with a Marine Corps general. Jack had waited for this moment all year, perhaps all his life. Meanwhile, in the seats just behind him, Henry Jacobs sat alone, quietly. No flags, no name tag, no welcoming banner, just an old man in a worn coat, seated in contemplative silence, as if he didn't truly belong to the ceremony unfolding, but had come instead to honor a silent promise to the names etched in stone. The program proceeded as planned, an opening address, a student reading a poem, and then the band playing The Last Post, a tune that always summoned unnameable memories for older ears. Everything appeared perfectly orchestrated. But within that careful orchestration, something unexpected happened. A sudden gust of wind swept through, catching a torch set near the ceremonial table. The small flame flickered for a moment before leaping onto the memorial display. Photographs, letters, and a folded flag. No one reacted in time. The fire spread quickly, singeing the corner of the first photograph, then licking at the edges of a yellowed letter, even scorching a corner of the folded flag. Shouts rang out. People sprang to their feet in panic. But before chaos could erupt, Henry rose. He did not speak, did not ask permission, did not hesitate. He strode forward, the soles of his old shoes scraping the ground, and moved as if by instinct forged in a distant past. Without gloves or tools, Henry shed his brown coat, wrapped it around his arm, and struck at the blaze with firm, decisive blows. The charred letter was knocked aside. The flag's corner was saved just in time. Within seconds, the flames were extinguished completely. When he straightened, the crowd was frozen in awe. His coat was torn at one side, the fabric singed and frayed, collar stained with smoke and ash. And where his sleeve had ridden up, accidentally, in the rush to smother the fire, there was a tattoo. Not a random bit of rebellious ink, but a precise emblem, faded by years yet painfully clear. A slender dagger pointing downward, flanked by two wings. Beneath it, a line of text in Latin, or something older, etched so faintly that only those who had served in secret units would recognize it. It was the symbol of a team never officially recorded, soldiers who carried out missions no one would ever claim. And now one of them stood before the crowd, his hand still dusty with ash, his eyes steady. No one spoke. No one dared utter a word first. Henry paid no heed to their stares. He simply brushed ash from his palm, knelt, retrieved the singed photograph, and placed it neatly back in its frame. He straightened the letter, folding its burnt corner inward with the gentlest touch, as if tucking away memories. The park seemed to hold its breath, not because of the fire, but at that moment when a man who had remained silent all his life revealed a fragment of his truth. And that single fragment, nothing more, was enough to silence an entire town. Dear viewers, take a moment to relax or grab a drink, then stay tuned for the rest of this story's surprising developments. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's always wonderful to see friends joining us from around the world. Comment 1 if you enjoyed this tale, so we can bring you even more. No one in the crowd spoke. No whispers, no murmur, no single clap echoed, as if the entire space had been sealed by that very moment. Then someone descended from the dais. His steps were steady, neither hurried nor slow, each one heavy with unspoken weight. It was General William Preston, U.S. Marine Corps, retired, who had once stood on countless honor platforms, commanding thousands through years steeped in smoke and fire. General Preston did not speak. He did not ask a question, seek confirmation, or cast a glance of inquiry. When his eyes fell on Henry's rolled-up sleeve, revealing that faint tattoo, he paused, not out of astonishment, but for another reason: recognition. It was the emblem he had only ever seen, not in reports or files, but in memory, where blood and sweat had been shed. A slender dagger crossed by tactical wings, with a line of text beneath, like a vow never to be shouted aloud. He had heard of the unit behind that insignia. Yet for years he believed they had vanished into history, with no survivors to tell their tale. And now one of them stood before him, not under floodlights, but under the gaze of an entire town. The general raised his hand, deliberately. It was not a casual wave, nor a perfunctory salute. It was ritual, a supreme honor an officer could bestow on one who had served, not simply for heroic deeds, but for the price paid. His arm rose slowly, fingers closed, posture rigid and ceremonious. A salute reserved only for those greater than the one saluting. Henry did not move. He did not return the salute. He simply stood straight, neither averting his eyes nor withdrawing his arm, showing no pride nor discomfort. His face bore only quietude, an enduring stillness, as though all noise within him had been stilled long ago. Then the first few in the crowd began to rise. No one gave a command. No music swelled. They simply stood, naturally, as if they had waited a lifetime for this moment. A veteran in the third row doffed his cap. A young student rose beside her mother. An elderly woman gripped her husband's arm as they both stood. No words were spoken, but in their eyes lay admiration, gratitude, and something almost like remorse. Nobody could name the precise spark that stirred them, but each one felt it. A man who had lived among them in silence, without title or recognition, carried within him the greatest of truths. And in that solemn salute, they saw what no speech could convey, that honor is not found in tales retold, but in the way a person chooses to live with their memories. Jack Thompson did not stand at once. He was the braggart who believed that loud words won belief. But in this moment, he felt held in place, not by others, but by his own heart. He looked at Henry, then around at the standing assembly. First came confusion, then awe, and finally a realization he had never before faced squarely: regret. Not regret for speaking too much, but for listening too little, for overlooking the power of silence. Silence that can speak more profoundly than any metal. Slowly, Jack rose. Gone was the swagger, the gaze seeking applause. In its place was quiet respect, unspoken yet sincere. This transformation required no fanfare, no soundtrack, no stage lighting. It flowed outward like a ripple, gentle yet deep, subtle yet unwavering. In that formal salute, Henry was not merely acknowledged. He was finally heard, not with ears, but with the hearts of a community that had once ignored him, but from that moment onward could never look away. Not long after that ceremony, a grainy video recorded on someone's ancient phone began to circulate. At first, just a few hundred shares, then thousands. Before long, the numbers exploded, millions of views crashing in like an unstoppable wave. On social media, the clip earned a simple yet stunned title: "The Hero Nobody Knew." That moment, Henry lunging into a small blaze without hesitation or a crowd's command, seemed to reach deep inside everyone who saw it. Not because the act was spectacular, but because of the shocking truth revealed afterward, when his sleeve rode up to expose the faded ink of a unit thought buried by history. An insignia no one dared mention in the official ranks. A soldier, a ghost, suddenly made painfully real. Phones at Riverside City Hall rang off the hook. Reporters calling, veterans from distant states texting and writing letters demanding verification. Even a Department of Defense official sent a formal inquiry, seeking confirmation of the identity, rank, and service record of the man bearing that specter tattoo. But Henry offered no reply. He had no social media, no television. If anyone recounted these developments to him, he simply remained silent, as always. Days later, Henry still arrived at River's Edge Cafe at precisely 7:10 a.m. The world outside seemingly had not caught up to him. He sat in his usual seat by the window, where the morning light sifted through a thin layer of dust, ordered a black coffee with no sugar, no pastry, no newspaper, just the coffee cup and the silence he carried with him. Behind the counter, Mary watched him wipe a smudge from the tabletop with a crumpled napkin. She said nothing, merely set a fresh pot of coffee at his elbow without waiting for a request. Susan quietly placed a neatly pressed handkerchief on the table beside him, an unspoken way of saying perhaps he needn't use his sleeve to clean the glass today. And Don, the young cashier who once only knew him as that lonely old man in the park, brought 2 small bouquets to Memorial Park at dawn, then returned without a word. Simple gestures all. None of them spoke of the viral video. They neither mentioned the millions of views nor the spreading news headlines. They did not ask him about his past, yet their movements, how they placed objects, how they held their distance, had subtly shifted. Not out of fear, but out of understanding. And respect need not always be voiced. Henry, through it all, remained Henry. He still dusted each tabletop crease as if performing a task assigned by someone he no longer named. But today felt different. A light footstep approached, not hurried, not tentative, simply purposeful. It was Jack. Jack Thompson, the man who once spoke the loudest and told the most stories, stood before him. Gone was the old uniform, the medals gleaming. Gone was the gaze seeking validation. He was just a man facing another man. Not peers by age, not equals in experience, but equals in one truth: the longing to be understood. Jack paused for a moment. He did not speak. Then, drawing a slow breath, he voiced a phrase he had likely rehearsed countless times. "I was wrong." Henry did not respond. He did not need to. No anger, no reproach, just a subtle nod, almost imperceptible, as if he had heard those words in the dreams of the long silent. Jack bent to pick up the rag lying on a nearby table. He did not ask permission. He did not offer help. He did not act for social media or the press, or to redeem himself. He simply did it, because at last he understood. Service is not about recognition. It is about the way one moves forward, refusing to abandon responsibility or forget the names the world left behind. And so they left the cafe together. No one snapped photos, no cameras rolled. Just 2 men, one with an untold past, the other learning the power of silence, walking toward Memorial Park. Not to step onto a stage, but to straighten and clean the memorial plaques of lost soldiers. And in that act, more than any speech, the story was fully told, not in words, but in a quiet, enduring continuation of duty. Invitations began pouring in, from Washington, D.C. to major media outlets. Offers to fly him to Arlington to speak at the national commemoration. Requests to feature him in specials, honoring unnamed heroes. Letters of praise, phone calls, each one arriving as if society were belatedly trying to repair what it had long overlooked. But Henry refused them all. He did not need a stage. He did not need applause. He certainly did not need fleeting admiration from people who knew him only through a brief video. Henry bore no anger, displayed no scorn. He merely nodded his thanks in his quiet way, then stepped out of every waiting spotlight. Instead of interviews and solemn flights, he left behind one small legacy, a simple wooden plaque mounted on the wall of River's Edge Cafe. Carved into the wood in unadorned letters, with no gilding or frame, were two words: Fortitudine in silentio. Strength in silence. No one asked why he chose that phrase, yet everyone understood. It was not a slogan, but a reminder, not to remember him, but to remember that there are values that do not shout, yet endure most steadfastly. From then on, every Thursday afternoon, Henry and Jack returned to Memorial Park together. Without announcement, without invitation, two men, one older, one more silent, working as if tending the memories no one else would care for. Henry still carried his worn canvas bag with a few bottles of glass cleaner, a fraying rag, small bouquets wrapped in yesterday's news. Jack brought clean gloves and fresh cloths. They shared the tasks without assignment, one wiping photos, the other refolding letters, lighting candles, straightening frames, each movement gentle, unhurried. They spoke no words, so as not to break the hush among the rows of names, for each name is a story, and silence is the only way to listen to them all at once. Townspeople began to notice, not from notices or bulletin boards, but from the steadfast presence of the two men at the memorial. From a distance, people would nod. Some would slip a flower into Henry's hand and melt away, offering no interruption. Riverside changed, not through meetings, but through feeling. Honor, they came to see, need not be marked by medals to be acknowledged. It could be a pair of hands that never left a dusty pane of glass, a presence, regular and unadorned. It could be integrity expressed through deed, not declaration. And sometimes, children learned of Henry and Jack not from speeches, but by example. That service needn't be in uniform, but in our refusal to forget. That real courage lies not on the battlefield, but in the quiet maintenance of memory long after the public has moved on. For Jack, every Thursday was atonement, a chance to relearn honor from its first principles. He had once believed it lived in polished nameplates and podiums, but through Henry, he discovered that honor is held in the things unseen, sustained by those who remember. For Henry, nothing outward changed. He spoke no more, basked in no limelight, yet there was a subtle lightness in his aged shoulders, and a late peace easing the weight he'd carried alone. He did not seek forgiveness, but now he no longer needed to hide. And so, every Thursday, the two men continued their vigil, not for recognition, not for legacy, but so that the names on those stones would never be forgotten. Perhaps one day the photos will fade, the letters crumble with time, but their work, that act, will remain. Like the small plaque in the cafe, needing no spotlight, simply placed in its rightful spot, to remind us that true strength sometimes lies in silence. Henry Jacobs's mission, as a once-forgotten veteran, changed everything. He taught Riverside that heroes aren't those who perform, but those who live their courage every day, quietly and steadfastly. And his story reminds us that true value springs from deeds unseen, Yet it is those very deeds that define our world. Thank you for joining us. Don't forget to let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's always amazing to see viewers tuning in from around the world. Comment 1 if you enjoyed this story so we can continue bringing you more great tales